Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein. Thank you all for joining me again as we go through and we do the next Beatitude from Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount. It's been a great journey so far. This is a great, or it's a really beautiful Beatitude we go over today that I really struck me. I remember the first time I read it. There's something in here. There's two things in here that really stood out to me the first time I ever read it. So I'm excited to talk about this one. I'm excited to read this one again and go through this one with y'all on the podcast today. So thank you everybody that's been following along and listening. Thank you for the YouTube subscribers and the Facebook follows. I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you to just all the viewers. I hope this is helping y'all as much as it's helped me, and it's been great for me to be able to get refreshed on some of these books and some of these perspectives and some new understandings even that have come along with it. So I appreciate this opportunity to share it with you. So here we go. We're going to be reading out of this copy right here. This is from 1938, as I always say, and this is it was originally copyrighted in 1934. This book came across my desk, this book came to my attention at the beginning of my spiritual journey as something that was very relevant and very important in the creation of 12-step programs. It was Emmet Fox was an individual, a lecturer and a writer that was really influential in the beginning of the recovery movement and the recovery self-help world. So that's how I got introduced to this. Someone suggested I read it, and I did. And it's one of the books that changed my life. So let's go ahead and we'll get to it. I'll read this Beatitude. The Beatitude, by the way, is blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And I'll read it all the way through, and then we'll go back through it with my thoughts and understanding. So here we go. This is the 7th Beatitude in the 2nd chapter of Emmet Fox's book, Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Here we receive an invaluable practical lesson in the art of prayer. And prayer, be it remembered, is our only means of returning to our communion with God. To the casual reader, this beatitude might sound like a mere conventional religious generalization, even a sententious sententious platitude of the kind too often favored by people who are anxious to be edifying without having anything in particular to say. As a matter of fact, prayer is the only real action in the full sense of the word, because prayer is the only thing that changes one's character. Prayer is the only thing that changes one's character. A change in character, or a real change in soul, is a real change. When that kind of change takes place, you become a different person, and therefore, for the rest of your life, you will act in a different way from the way in which you have previously acted, and in which you would have continued to act had you not prayed. In other words, you can become a different man. The amount of the difference might only be very slight for each time that you pray. Nevertheless, it is there. For you cannot pray without making yourself different in some degree. If you should get a very strong realization of the presence of God with you, it would make a very great and dramatic change in your character, so that in the twinkling of an eye, your outlook, your habits, and your whole life, in fact, would completely change in every respect. Many such cases are recorded on record, both in the East and in the West. the genuine cases of what used to be called conversion being instances in point. Because the change caused by prayer is a radical one, Jesus refers to it as being born again. Since it makes you into a different man, it is actually as though you had been born anew. The word prayer should be understood as including any form of communion or attempted communion with God, whether vocal or purely mental. It includes both affirmative and invocatory prayer, each of which is good in its own place, meditation, and the highest of all forms of prayer, which is contemplation. In the absence of prayer, all that you can do is to express the character that you have in whatever circumstances you find yourself. So much is this the case that most of your friends would be prepared to predict beforehand what your conduct would be in various kinds of crises that would arise. Prayer, by changing your character, makes a new reaction possible. The great essential for success in prayer, for obtaining the peace of the presence of God, which is the secret of healing oneself and others too, of obtaining inspiration, which is the breath of the soul, of acquiring spiritual development, is that we first attain some degree of true peace of mind. This true interior soul peace was known to the mystics as serenity. And they never tired of telling us that serenity is the grand passport to the presence of God. The sea as smooth as glass that is round about the great white throne. This is not to say that one cannot overcome even the most serious difficulties by prayer without having any serenity at all, for of course one can. In fact, the greater the trouble one is in, the less serenity he will be able to have, and serenity itself is only to be had by prayer and by forgiving of others and of oneself. But serenity you must have before you can make any true spiritual progress. And it is serenity, that fundamental tranquility of soul, that Jesus refers to by the word peace. The peace that passes all human understanding. The peacemakers spoken of in this Beatitude are those who make or bring about this true peace or serenity in their own souls, for it is they who surmount limitation and become actually, and not merely potentially, the children of God. This condition of mind is the objective at which Jesus aims in all instructions, which he gives us in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. As long as there is fear or resentment or any trouble in your heart, that is to say, as long as you lack serenity or peace, it is not possible for you to attain very much. Some degree of serenity is essential to the attainment of any true concentration. Of course, to be a peacemaker, in the usual sense of composing the quarrels of other people, is an excellent thing, but as all practical people know, an essentially difficult role to fill. By interfering in other people's strife, it is ever so much easier to make things worse than to make them better. Personal opinion is almost certain to enter into your efforts, and personal opinion is exceedingly likely to be wrong. If you can get both of the people concerned to take a new view of the matter of controversy, that, of course, is well, but otherwise, if you merely bring about a compromise in which they consent to agree from motives of self-interest or as a result of some kind of coercion, then the trouble has only been patched up on the surface. And there is no true peace, because they are not, both of them, satisfied and forgiving. Once you understand the power of prayer, you will be able to heal many quarrels in a true way, probably without speaking at all. The silent thought of the all power of love and wisdom will cause any trouble to melt away almost imperceptibly. Then, whatever arrangement will be best for all parties in the long run will come about under the influence of the word thus spoken silently. That's it for today. Now, I don't know if you found that one as a revelation, maybe as I do, but I can tell you this. There's some really big stuff in this one. There's some really beautiful concepts and understandings that I needed to know. And I needed someone to tell me. So it stuck in my mind. Even if I didn't believe it in the beginning, right? So let's get into it. We get to the first one pretty quick. But I would like to say, like, I like how he starts this one off about blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God, and tells us this is actually about prayer, right? Because my initial thoughts is not with prayer when it comes to that. When I instantly think mediator, and I instantly think someone stepping in between two people, right? Somebody trying to coerce peace, and it's not what we're talking about here. And I'm really glad that he, right out the gate, tells us that, right? He tells us that this isn't about that simple statement that almost sounds like something people are just like, oh, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those that help people come to peace because they will be called children of God. And it's much more than that. It's not some empty saying that should be looked over with a presumed intention. So, and I also like in that first one, he says prayer is communion with God. Prayer is communication with that God of your understanding, that connection. Going back to that connection with that power, that source, that God, whatever it is that works for you, whatever you're working with here, prayer is going back to that connection. And now this is the first big thing he says it almost casually in it. It's like a side comment, right? And he says this: prayer is the only real action in the full sense of the word, because prayer is the only thing that changes one's character. What? So again, when I read this was at the beginning of my spiritual journey. This was at the beginning of me changing my life entirely. This was when I was stopping drinking and stopping using drugs, and when I had just lost my brother, and everything I knew about living was changing, right? So change was very important to me. It was a relevant topic in my mind, right? So to hear that quote, that prayer is the only real action in the full sense of the word, because prayer is the only thing that changes one's character. And then he talks about the change for a while, right? He talks about what that actually means. And I realized when we're talking about change of character, he says change of soul as well. It's the only type of permanent change. It's the only way you can change the man you are, the person you are, for whoever's listening. And every other type of change is temporary. It's interesting to me because this is similar to what James Allen talks about. I mean, which makes sense because both of these, As a Man Thinketh and Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount, is both about, comes from the Sermon on the Mount from the Bible, right? So we're talking about Jesus' teachings. But the way they both phrase it is interesting to me because Emmett Fox or James Allen even talks about how forced external changes don't work. They're always going to be temporary. There's always going to be a battle because the actual thinking hasn't changed behind it. And Emmett Fox is talking about your soul hasn't actually changed. Your character hasn't actually changed. When you do a forced external change, that means you're consciously saying, I'm going against my preference, or I'm going against what I normally would do, and I'm going to do something different. Right? So it's a choice every time. First of all, that's exhausting. And secondly, that means your thoughts aren't right along with it. Right? And your soul is still serving a selfish idol. It's still serving yourself. It's still serving um your own pleasures and comfort at the end of the day, right? So, if it is not a change of character and a change of soul, it will be temporary every time. And when you can get that change of soul, you become a different person. You become a new man, right? It lets you become something, it lets you grow into something new and beautiful and exciting, right? And I like how he says it might happen slowly, but it happens every time you pray. Every time you go to have communion with that God of your understanding, that power and that source, you're changing your character. You're asking that to come in and change you. So you might not notice it. He talks about how there's rapid conversions that happened throughout history, and they're all well documented. They're all documented in Eastern and Western histories and developments, right? But a lot of times it's in the 12-step rooms. I call them the educational varieties, right? Um, where it just is small little changes over time, and eventually you have a whole different spirit you're living with. You have a whole different intention to life that you're living with. And for a guy like me, it really is like being born again. Because the life I live today is 100% different than any life or semblance of living that I had had previously. I am nowhere even close to the same person. To be fair, I might have had some of these character qualities when I was growing up. I've gotten back to some authentically me type of living. But this person was gone for a very long time. And it was replaced by a selfish, self-centered individual that only had the best interests of me involved in all of my decisions. It was very rare that I would have a genuine thought of others, let alone act on it. And I have those more often than not these days. And that blows my mind. So to be able that statement about being called born again it's been true for me. And it even happened slowly, and I still believe it was just this incredible change of character for me. And I thank God for that every day. And I really like how Emmett Fox said prayer can be a lot of things. Let's see we'll read that again just to make sure I get it right. It includes both affirmative and invocatory prayer, which is the difference between affirming that God is there, affirming that God has helped you, He's given you these things, or I'm sure I might be pronouncing that wrong, but invocatory is asking for help. It's the requesting. It's the pleading to God. Maybe is a way to say it, or the going to God with something. So those two types of actual verbal prayers, um, each of which is in its own place. A meditation, which is we can say the Eastern type of meditation is what he's referring to here, that quiet practice, the presence and mindfulness of being right where you are, right? And then I like this part, the highest of all forms of prayer, which is contemplation. And I love that. It's very interesting to me to sit there and realize that that's a form of prayer. And what he means by contemplation is contemplate the qualities of God. Now, that can look a lot of ways. That can actually be thinking about specific qualities like love and kindness and forgiveness and courage and honesty and all of these beautiful virtues and Christ-like qualities, right? You could just be thinking about those individually, or you can be thinking about how they apply in your own life and how that they are manifesting in you, or how you are being intentional about practicing them, right? So you can think about them as an individual thing. Think about how you are practicing them, or you could think about how they're practiced by individuals throughout history. And we could be talking about the example of Jesus Christ. We could be talking about other Eastern religious examples. We could be talking about just genuine people and individuals and characters along the course of history that have practiced these things to a point of being known for them, right? Like just the practice of peace and choosing nonviolence. There's and these people of the utmost integrity that really get brought into this. So it's pretty amazing at the end of the day. So that contemplation, the highest forms of all prayer, which is contemplation, which is the focusing on the qualities of God in some way, shape, or form. So I love that, honestly. And we go to a point next where he's like, without prayer, all you have is your character, which seems like almost a non-statement, really. Without prayer, all you have is your character. Well, of course, right? Like what else are we going to be talking about? But what he's meaning is you're always going to be doing the same things. Nothing changes if nothing changes. If you want to get different results, you have to do things differently. And without prayer in your life, you will never have that change in character to have a permanent change in behaviors and interactions and perspective. And he even says, ask your friends how you're going to react. Without prayer, they're going to be right. They're going to know how you feel. They're going to know what your instant reaction is going to be, because you're not trying to actually change it. You're not taking the actions appropriate that will actually give you the change in character, right? You become just a predictable person by your own character defects, right? Which is kind of jarring, I guess. But I believe that to be true. Because as soon as I introduced prayer into my life, like I said, it was more of a slow process for me. But eventually I started to surprise myself. There was times I would reach for anger and it wouldn't be there. I would reach for self-pity and I couldn't stay in it. Which sounds weird to say. But that was one of my worst character defects. So the prayer changes you when you're willing to let go of those things. And what a thing to be grateful for, really. Right? And he goes into the great essential for success in prayer for obtaining that. So the success in prayer is obtaining the sense of the presence of God, which is the secret of healing oneself and others too, of obtaining inspiration, which is the breath of the soul, of acquiring spiritual development, is that we first attain some degree of true peace of mind, right? So the point and the goal of prayer is obtaining that sense of the presence of God, right? Which is, I believe, I've experienced, and I will continue to experience my daily practices. And when you feel that connection with a power greater than yourself, you feel that internal sense of peace that comes along with it. I love what he says that does for a person. It gives this, that's the secret to healing oneself and healing others. That's the inspiration, which is the breath of the soul, right? It's rejuvenating, of acquiring spiritual development to make this actual progress in your spiritual life, to make progress towards your ideal, towards your goal, whatever that is, right? Is to connect to that source, that energy, that God of your understanding, which brings you to some degree to true peace of mind. Now, this is the next big thing, right? There's things called like the Serenity Prayer. You heard me read this through once, so you know what I'm probably going to talk about next. But like the Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity, right? Um, in James Allen's book, the last chapter is called Serenity. This word serenity carries a lot of weight, right? And he tells us what it is right here. This was um, hugely impactful, and I loved the definition he gave. So I'm going to read two excerpts because it makes it speak for itself, right? So after that degree of true peace of mind, it says this true interior soul peace was known to the mystics as serenity, and they never tired of telling us that serenity is the grand passport to the presence of God, that sea as smooth as glass that is round the great white throne. What? What does this mean? Right? This means that serenity is as close as we can get to God. This is that peace of soul. It's not just peace of mind and peace of body, it's peace of heart and peace of soul. So that practice of prayer and meditation um and contemplation brings us closer and able to connect with that peace, true peace of mind, and that true interior soul peace. It quiets the mind and lets us have that peace of soul, which we call serenity. And that allows us to experience the presence of God. That allows us to sense the immense emotional, spiritual connection that allows us to have that healing and that inspiration and that spiritual progress, right? And that is how I love how he said it, because it was such an interesting way. The sea as smooth as glass that is around the great white throne. That is being as close to God as you possibly could be, is in those moments. That is serenity. Now, I can tell you this. I experience that from time to time. My selfish mindset would like to experience it more. I'm not going to lie to you. But when you do, and for those that have, it's one of the most refreshing, rejuvenating, realigning feelings. It's not about the feeling maybe as much as it is about the understanding you get from it. Because it just puts everything back into the perspective it needs to be. It reprioritizes your life so you're looking at the right things. Maybe is a better way to say it. And your faith is renewed. And it's not even a faith in those moments, it's more of a knowing. any lack or doubt is gone in those minutes you're connected, however long you can hold on to it. But it's interesting because as soon as you experience it, as soon as the thought comes across your mind that I want to hold on to this, it starts to slip away because then you get involved. I show up everywhere, every time, right? Even when I'm sitting with God. It's mind-boggling to me sometimes. So, but another part I wanted to read for you was, but serenity you must have before you can make any true spiritual progress. It is this serenity, that fundamental tranquility of soul, that Jesus refers to by the word peace. The peace that passes all human understanding. Like I said, it's difficult to really put words to. I'm doing the best I can, and because I've given this a lot of thought, I've given this a lot of my mental space to understand what that is. And I really do believe Emmett Fox has put it in words better than I ever could. That peace of soul, that tranquility of soul. And what's interesting is he says you have to practice prayer and the meditation and contemplation, right? Prayer of some sort, really. And you get this peace of true peace of mind through doing that. And then you can actually tap into serenity, which is peace of soul. And I don't think you can do any, like, one of the things that I do want to say is in the 12-step realm, you go through the steps, whatever it is, if you're in NA or AA or CA or SA or FA or whatever it might be, you tap into these things. You go through these steps and you get rid of all of these resentments and selfish things and all of these things that drive a wedge between you and the God of your understanding. So that's why it's so important to clean this up. That's why it's so important to go through and do this work so you can get all of your stuff out of the way to get that peace of mind and then tap into that serenity. That's just waiting for you to get there. You just have to show up. And he says, you can get through. There's a part there. In fact, the greater the trouble in one's life, the less serenity you will be able to have. And serenity itself is the only thing, only to be had by prayer and by forgiving of others and oneself. Right? You can't get serenity when you've got work to do. Right? You can ask for guidance. You can find that in prayer. You can find that in meditation and contemplation. Right? There's things that we have to do to tap into that serenity to get that change in soul, right? That's why a spiritual practice is so important to practice, right? To take action on every single day, because that's where the change in soul comes from, right? So, and also, hot take for anybody in recovery, I guess. That's why 10, 11, and 12 are at the back end, right? Because you can't actually start to change your character. You can have some forced external changes, but 10, 11, and 12, truly, the true practice of those steps comes in after you've cleaned this stuff up, after you've done and taken a look at your part, after you've practiced some forgiveness of others and yourself, after you've made amends, after you've been willing to let go of these character defects, after you've been willing to see what those character defects even are, right? That has to happen first before you can have a true and authentic practice of 10, 11, and 12. Just a personal opinion, I guess, there. But it's so incredibly important to have that daily practice. And he says, this is the peace we're talking about, this internal peace, this peace of soul, this tranquility of soul, this serenity is the peace we're talking about here. So the peacemakers are the ones that have found serenity. And now, I don't know if you've ever met somebody that is carrying serenity, somebody that embodies it, somebody that has a spiritual essence around them. And I mean that in a very real way. You can tell just by sitting next to them, the energy that is emanating from them gives you this sense of peace. And it can impact you in a very real way. Right? So the peacemakers are the ones that have found serenity. This is why they're called children of God, because they've actually connected with Him. They've actually connected to that presence of Him. They are in that water smooth as glass around His throne, as Emmet Fox put it. What a powerful image that is. What an incredible place to be when you think about it that way. So it's just an absolutely fantastic thing here. And I do like how we talked about actually when he trying to help people and actually getting involved with things here is people try to solve issues when their own house isn't even in order. And now I'm all up for good intentions, but the line here, by interfering in other people's strife, it is ever so much easier to make things worse than to make them better. Personal opinion is almost certain to enter into your efforts, and personal opinion is exceedingly likely to be wrong. After I just gave you a personal opinion. Excuse that, but so take that for what you would. If you can get both of the people concerned to take a new view of the matter in controversy, that, of course, is well. Right? If we can give perspective, not give them necessarily a solution. But otherwise, if you merely bring them about a compromise in which they consent to agree from motives of self-interest or as a result of being patched up on the surface, and there is no true peace because they are not, both of them, satisfied and forgiving. So these are the people that stop drinking because they want this relationship back. They want their kids back. These are the people that, through gritted teeth, agree to settlements. These are the people that are going against their self-interests and their selfish actions without really wanting to. When that happens, it's never a true change. It's never a true peace because it's not chosen. It's a forced or coerced. And that means it'll never stay, which is unfortunate. But that's why perspective is everything. Framing is everything. And when you can give a perspective that they can both agree on and actually feel good about entering into, you can facilitate them choosing peace. But I don't know if you'd still call yourself a peacemaker. But I can tell you this too. The last part of that really was, I talked about earlier, people that embody it. A lot of people that have achieved serenity don't have to do much talking about it in that sense because it's just obvious. It's a very real thing to observe. So they don't usually have to convince anyone of a perspective. I've seen people be able to enter a room and just be present and peace fall over the room. Blows my mind. The influence one person can have. by not really necessarily taking an action, but just bringing peace and serenity, that peace of soul with him. It's absolutely incredible. So, fantastic beatitude. Again, very, very important stuff. To sum up, prayer is the only true way to change, and serenity is peace of soul, tranquility of soul. If you take those two things away from this beatitude, you can make a lot of progress. So, get your own house in order, and practice prayer in some way, shape, or form, and watch your life change. That's what happened to mine. So, great reading today. Great stuff to talk about. Lots of good stuff to talk about. So, this is the 7th one in this series. We will be doing one more. And then next week, I'll tell you what we're going to go on to. I've had some considerations, maybe to continue on with Sermon on the Mount, but I've got another one that just popped into mind that we might be doing. So, I appreciate everyone's time and everyone's patience as we figure this out, but I appreciate everyone's participation and everyone that tunes in and listens and just enjoys it. So this is a joy for me to do and be able to share my experience with y'all. So thank you all again, and until next time, thanks.